Everybody, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso, joined as always by Connor Rogers. First off, we're throwing it back and recording in StreamYard due to some Riverside technical difficulties. They give us our rewatchable files back, which I hope you all watch, featuring Will and Paul. But then we had some issues in the studio, so we're recording here. We're going to talk a little bit about our mental state at this stage of the season and the fact that we need to be talking the draft and offseason right now. Also talk a little bit about the Garrett Wilson trade chatter and a video going around of Mark Gastineau and Brett Favre today, because of course that's on the list of things we need to discuss. Connor, how you doing? How you feeling?
That last part, truly a never a dull day in Jetland, but I'm doing good. This is going to be a show let out with emotions that everybody's feeling right now. And you nailed it at the top. I mean, this really sums it up. The fact that we had an Indiana Jones-like search for the rewatchables that Paul and Will did, which is great work by them. A lot of time invested, and then the file was just missing for days, and we finally got that. So it's good that everybody got to watch that. But more importantly, too, we're gonna play it safe here and record this tonight. But it'll be a fun show. There's a lot to talk about. We're at the point of the season. You look through the phases, right? It's like the suffering is over with the Jets this year. I don't think any Jets fan is getting any gut punches anymore. And they lost in overtime in horrible fashion to Miami. And I don't think anybody was like, oh my God. Everybody's like, oh, we've seen this 50 times before. We're ready to move on to the draft and the hiring process.
Yeah, I tweeted out this morning, who do you want the Jets to take in the NFL draft? And even as I sent it, I was like, man, it's really sad. And it sucks that I have to be asking that question right now. And we got a lot of good answers, and there's a lot of good debate to be had. And we'll see where the Jets pick lands. And it's going to be one of the more wide open discourses, I think, that we've seen in recent years, which will make for plenty of good fodder in January, February, and March, where it's supposed to be. But for this stage of December, it could be a little depressing. And there's some of the other stories going around about, Breece Hall's hurt, so Sauce Gardner's hurt. Is Garrett Wilson even going to want to be here? It's grim. Now, I'm sure you get this question all the time. I know I get it. We had high expectations this year, reasonably high expectations. We didn't say the Jets were going to win the Super Bowl. We didn't say they were going to win 14 games, but we thought they were going to be a playoff team. And we certainly thought they were going to be playing meaningful December games. And, I think when we look back on this year, we're all going to agree that the season ended in some shape or form when they blew that Denver game.
Yep.
And something felt off, just like it felt off with the Giants game that they actually won the year before, where it's like, something's not right here. But for the bottom to fall out this severe, I'm trying to come to terms with where it sits in like a fan pain threshold compared to other years. It reminds me a lot of 2011. There were a lot of expectations that year, but even that season, they were 8-5, and they seemed to be on their way to the playoffs, and they were playing really important games until late into the season. 2016, there were expectations coming off 2015, and then the bottom fell out pretty early, but I don't know. There wasn't quite that level of hype. Those are the two closest things, but I just think how toxic it's gotten so quickly. Like, this thing was toxic by like week 11 with everything that's gone on around it. So it actually is probably worse than those two seasons. And I just hate, what bums me out is seeing some of the apathy where it's like, we've tried absolutely everything. What is left to try? But I also think we got to be honest with ourselves in that I think we all knew in the back of our head, there was a path to this blowing up with Rodgers and not working. His age, coming off a major injury. It was a Hail Mary by this front office who we had a lot of questions about, and this coaching staff who we had a lot of questions about. And unfortunately, it's blown up. I think objectively, it's not wholly shocking. To me, what's wholly shocking is just, I could see this if they were like 6-6 right now, or like 6-7, but to be 3-10 and so incapable of winning any game, I think that's the biggest gut punch. What is your sort of fan POV at this moment, and where this ranks and reminds you of other seasons?
That last part is really hard because you bring up 2011. I guess that is the closest, even though it feels so different, because the 2010 Jets had a lot of success. 2009, they sneak into the playoffs and they turn into this team that arrived a year too early. It was like, wow, the Jets are 1 win away from the Super Bowl. When and how did this happen? And then because of that, that reminded me so much of the Rangers a couple years ago, where they were coming through a short rebuild, and then they became a tougher team in the offseason, and it was their first year under Gerard Gallant, and they kept winning. Everyone's like, how are they winning like this? And then they made the playoffs, and they made to the Eastern Conference Final, and they were a couple games away from the Stanley Cup, and they really had the series under control. And then they arrived early. The Rangers weren't supposed to be that good that year. And then the next year, they got bounced by the Devils in the first round of the playoffs. That was a disappointment. And they regrouped and made the ECF the following year, where they were a powerhouse and won the President's Trophy, even though they came up short. The Jets in 2009, like the first Rangers team I mentioned, they arrived early. But then in 2010, they really did meet expectations. They were the Hard Knocks team. They had a ton of talent. They had a ton of hype. They had a ton of veterans. And when you come up really a play short of making the Super Bowl, you can't sit here and go, God, they were so disappointing. Like, that's ridiculous. They were a really good team, and they were expected to be a really good team. And Rex Ryan had the famous speech during Hard Knocks where he said, like, fuck being the little guy. Like, I don't want to be under the radar. Like, go out and expect to kick everyone's ass and go out and do it. And this Jets team, what a lot of people forgot about, and something I didn't predict this, let me be that clear, but something I was cautious about, at least, and why I didn't pick them to win the division, and I think plenty of people were cautious, is that they didn't win enough games last year. And that is not an Aaron Rodgers fixed thing. That was an infrastructure thing with the coaching staff and everybody else. If the Jets had snuck into the playoffs last year and got, even blown out in the first round of the playoffs, and then Rodgers was coming back, everybody would be like, God, this team's going to be unstoppable. But everybody just kind of assumed, even after they didn't win, that with him coming back, that it would be fine, and ignored a lot of flaws around not only the roster, but the coaching. So, and that you do have to learn how to win at the NFL level. The Jets have a lot of good players that knew how to win at the college level. Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, on and on and on. But winning at the NFL level is a whole nother beast. And they do have guys that need to learn how to win. And it's not, by the way, I don't blame the players in this situation. They haven't been taught how to win by leadership, which is coaching to me. So it is hard to draw a comparison for this season, because even if you bring up the vibe of 2011, especially how it ended, and that team had some rocky locker room stuff, it felt like they weren't as lovable as 2009, 2010, which we loved those teams. There was definitely some stranger vibes with 2011, and they lose the last 3 games. They were 8-5, like you said, and then they lose the last 3 games. They don't make the playoffs by a game. I mean, this team, they're not even around it, right? And yes, they keep coming up short. Like, they are the kings of losing one-score games in different fashion over and over again. A variety of special teams mistakes, a variety of the offense coming up short, a variety of the defense absolutely getting gashed at the end of the game. It's somewhat different every time. So this team, the unlikable nature that they went through for a large portion of the season, I thought nothing will come, comparable to 2016, but they had some of that. Like, the fans really started to sour on Rodgers really quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
And started to sour. They soured on Saleh right out of the gate this year. And I think there's been plenty of mercenaries on this team that have been a colossal failure, right? Like Javon Kinlaw. Massive, massive disappointment. That's a mercenary. Tyron Smith, people don't dislike Tyron Smith, but he's a mercenary that's cooked. Like, he's done.
Yep.
He's a giant disappointment. Yep. You have no attachment to those players as a fan, because they haven't done anything for you. So then when they arrive here with expectations and they stink, you turn really quickly as a fan. That's natural. Where if Breece Hall fumbles or Garrett Wilson drops a pass, you love those guys because they've already had success for you. And they made a mistake and you're frustrated in the moment, but that's your guy. So this Jets team is very, very unique in that sense, and very hard to wrap your head around. And I think they become even more difficult to wrap your head around because there is some lingering uncertainty with this team. We knew after 2016, that locker room hated each other, that Fitz was gone, and a lot of the guys that were problematic were gone. And after 2011, you still had belief in Rex, because as much as they lost 3 straight games, they went 8-8, didn't make the playoffs. Rex had 2 AFC championships before that, where you could always say Rex Ryan has shown how to win, and he did it a year ago. We don't know who's coaching the team. We don't know who's going to be the GM. I can't sit here and tell you that Rodgers will or won't be back because I can't get inside the mind of ownership and who they're hiring and all of these things. He most likely won't be, but you never know. There's a lot of weird things up in the air. And then, Joe, what happens is that stinks for the fans. This is the worst thing for the fans. The media starts to attach themselves to doom scenarios that make you nervous as a fan. Garrett Wilson's going to want out. This, that, the things that are your biggest fears. And number one, I think bringing those things up right now is just shitty, honestly, because you don't know that about Garrett Wilson. Like, you don't,
Yep.
because here's the reality. If he wants out and he hasn't said that yet, well, Garrett Wilson is a first-round pick that is on his 4th year of his rookie contract next year and then has the 5th-year option and then the franchise tag. The CBA for players has kind of eliminated a lot of their leverage here. Number two, he hasn't said anything about that. Number three, we have no idea who the quarterback or the coach of the team is next year. So that's doom clickbait kind of stuff that if it happens, it happens. But when it's talked about now, it's the lowest point. It's the lowest feeling as a fan.
Yeah, it's a lot of what else are you going to talk about? Speculation. It's an assumption because Garrett seems particularly bummed after these losses because he's a player that, as you said, fans are attached to. They're not attached to the Last Dance Jets. They're attached to the guys who were drafted here and had some success. And you get into this wallowing around this mopey team, and this team will be remembered for their moping and their finger pointing. That's what this season will be remembered for. That, well, of course he's not going to want to be here, but the reality is he's under contract. If the Jets pay him his market value, if not slightly higher, money will talk. We also don't know who the head coach, general manager, and quarterback are going to be next year, and that's going to have a huge impact ultimately on any decisions that are made around him, around Brees, around Sauce, around Jermaine, around any of these young guys. So I don't think that Garrett Wilson just decided halfway through the year, I'm demanding a trade. I think the season's going to play out. He's going to go over 1,000 yards again. He's going to have some nice moments, and we're going to see where the chips land. And like we've said previously, I hope the new GM and the new head coach sit down with him on day one and say, we are building around you on offense. You are going to be one of our offensive captains next year. And we are going to build this the right way. And it is we're turning the page, and it's a new regime. And, whoever else is around him, and that could be Sauce on defense, that could be Jermaine on defense, it's going to be Quinnen on defense in a post-Mosley era. And on offense, it's probably going to be a post-Rodgers era. Where is it Garrett? Is it Morgan Moses back on a one-year deal to serve as that veteran leader? Or is it somebody else? I mean, let's see. I just think it's too early to kiss this guy goodbye. I think he's going to be here. I think he's going to be on the Jets next year. And maybe I'll look insane for saying that because the Jets traded Darrelle Revis. The Jets traded Jamal Adams. The Jets traded Sheldon Richardson after he won Defensive Rookie of the Year. The Jets traded Leonard Williams. The Jets trade a lot of people who have looked like they're going to be building blocks.
Santana Moss.
Laverne Cole was left initially, I think, in free agency. These things do happen with the Jets, so I don't want to be like, oh my God, it would be the most bizarre thing in the world. It could, but I just think right now, particularly with the Garrett stuff, I don't necessarily think there's any smoke there. I think it's people just assuming the worst in what's been a really shitty season. Let's see if the Jets go higher. Let's say hypothetically Mike Vrabel, if he can't sit down with Garrett Wilson and they can't work something out for him to be the number one receiver next year, among all the other stuff we're going to have. And with Brees, I think it's more on the other side where you're seeing some fans prematurely sour on him because there's been a couple okay moments from some mid-round rookies who I like. And I think it's good that the Jets have multiple running backs who can make plays. This is not Isaiah Davis ran for 123 yards and had 60-yard receivings and 2 touchdowns. He had 8 carries for 40 yards. And, Braylon Allen, who they need to use more and need to use more effectively, it has not done all that much this year. He has a worse yards per carry than Breece Hall by a meaningful margin. And Breece Hall is the guy who takes the check down that he gets twice a game and turns it into a 70-yard gain. So I'm just not in a rush to say goodbye to the 2022 class. And that includes Sauce Gardner. And we've been guilty of this at times too, being like, man, this guy looks like he went sour milk with this entire situation. Maybe you trade him for capital. And look, maybe one of these guys, again, as part of the reboot, does get traded. It's probably more likely, though, that a new defensive coach is going to look at some different schematic things they can do with Sauce, and he's going to be a key part of their team going forward. Same with Jermaine. I don't necessarily think that you want to start taking apart pieces to really try to start from scratch, because one of the benefits for someone coming in here is that you have some pieces. I look at the Jets offense. They need some tight ends. They got to figure out quarterback, and we'll see what happens with Devontae. But beyond that, like, you feel good about running back, you feel good about center, you feel good about tackle. You're not starting from scratch. So let's see how it shakes out. But I get it, because I'm a Jets fan too, not just someone who incessantly rants about this team. Like, this has sucked, and it is a bummer that these late season home games and these games like Jets Jags, like, I got to be honest, like, it is for the best if the Jets lose this weekend. And again, I'm not going to ever be mad at the team for winning. I mean, certainly it'd be nice to beat Mac Jones for once, but in this case, in this matchup where there's no, like, you're not playing Miami, you're not playing Buffalo, and Jacksonville has the same record as you, and everyone's this tightly bunched together, it will be better for the asset the Jets get if they lose this game. And it's just like, it's the lowest announcer matchup on CBS. It's like the worst game of the weekend record wise. And you didn't want to have to be here thinking about this stuff. But the reality is that they are. And now you need to look at a proper rebuild. And I do think that we all kind of probably felt in the back of their mind that, were they really ever going to win anything of consequence with Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh? And did it take this kind of catastrophe to really get the full reset? And is it enough of a catastrophe that the Jets change some ways of working and structural things internally to actually get back to what they were doing? It's not just 2009 and 2010. The Jets were consistently good from 1997 all the way up through 2011. They were over 500 or in the playoffs in 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011. All with this ownership group who has a ton of flaws. I get it, but they're not selling. So how do we talk about how they get back to that era where they were winning in the playoffs every year or every other year? And a new GM and a new head coach will have a chance to do that. When you look at that core four from 2022, and I don't want to give them they're not to the Revis Harris Mangold,
Right.
core four level yet, but who do you, if someone asks you today, of the four, how many do you think are going to be starting week one for the team next year? What would be your answer?
All four. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't.
Good.
Yeah. I think I would. If you're a GM, you have to come in and evaluate a lot of things in an organization, and you're not going to learn about those guys. So you go through let's go through them individually. I think this is the easiest way to do it. Start with Jermaine because he's the easiest. He just tore his Achilles. There's no value for him coming off a torn Achilles. And if a team wants him, they're going to try to lowball you. And we've said it many times in this podcast. From a DNA standpoint, the Jets need more Jermaine Johnsons, not less. They need somebody that they take it personal. Like, it's a personal insult to them when the team is getting punked. And I think that, he'll do his rehab and he'll be back with the Jets next year. And, I've thrown this out already. Like, you start to think of next year, this is just an example, but if the Jets get a Mason Graham and your front four is Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson on the edges, who are very different pass rushers, and then Quinnen Williams and Mason Graham in the inside, and you're obviously going to need some rotational guys. Like, that's a really stout, impressive front four that can get after the passer. So it'd be shocking. So then you go to Breece, who's a little bit more difficult, right? Because he's a running back. He's going into year 4. He was not a first rounder. The other 3 were. So there's no fifth-year option. So you're looking at that scenario and going, there's really 3 outcomes after 2025 for Breece.